Welcome to the Stylish Design channel. I will help you understand what HTML is in an understandable format and for free. Content of the video lesson. Part 1. What is a form in HTML? The form element. The label element. The input element. Button element. The select element. Data list element. The opt group element. The option element. The text area element. The output element. Element progress. The field set element. Legend element. What is a form in HTML? A form is a web page component with controls such as text boxes, buttons, checkboxes, a range, or a color picker. The user can interact with such a form by providing data, which can then be sent to the server for further processing. For example, returning the results of a search or calculation. Writing a form consists of several steps that can be performed in any order. Writing the user interface, implementing server-side processing, and configuring the interface to communicate with the server. An attribute in the form element is used to specify the exact method. Web programming languages such as PHP and Perl are used to receive and process form data. The form element defines an HTML form for user input. A form element is a hyperlink that can be controlled by a set of related controls whose values can be sent to the server for processing. Example. Attributes of the form element. The name text attribute specifies the name of the form. Action URL attribute specifies where to send form data when submitting the form. The method post attribute specifies the HTTP method used when submitting form data. Example. The label element defines a label for the input element. The label element is not rendered as something special to the user. However, it provides usability for mouse users because if the user clicks the text in the label element, it toggles the control. The attribute for the label tag must be equal to the id attribute of the associated element to link them together. Example. Tip. A label can be bound to an element either by using or by placing the element inside a label element. Label element attributes. The for_element_id attribute indicates which element of the form the label is attached to. Example. The input element defines an input field into which the user can enter data. Input elements are used within the input element to declare input controls that allow users to enter data. The input field can change in different ways depending on the type attribute. Example. Note. The input element is empty. It contains only attributes. Tip. Use a label to define labels for entering items. Attribute the input type button element. The type attribute returns the type of the input button form element. Value attribute specifies or returns the value of the value attribute of the input button. Example. Attribute the input type checkbox element. Type attribute returns the type of the checkbox form element. Example. Attributes element input type color. Type attribute returns the type of the form element that is the color picker. Example. Attributes element input type date. Type attribute returns the type of the form element. A date field. Value attribute specifies or returns the value of the value attribute of the date field. Example. Attribute the element input type email. Type attribute returns the type of the form element. The email field. Value attribute specifies or returns the value of the value attribute of the email field. Example. Attribute the input type file element. Type attribute returns what type of form element the file upload button is. Example. Attribute the element input type image. Type attribute returns the type of the form element. The input image src attribute specifies or returns the value of the src attribute of the input image. Alt attribute specifies or returns the value of the alt attribute of the input image. Width attribute defines or returns the value of the width attribute of the input image. Height attribute specifies or returns the value of the height attribute of the input image. Example: attribute element input type number. Type attribute returns the type of the form element. The number field. Value attribute specifies or returns the value of the value attribute of a numeric field. Example: attribute the element input type password. Type attribute returns the type of the form element. The password field. Value attribute specifies or returns the value of the value attribute of the password field. Example: attributes element input type radio. Type attribute returns the type of the form element. A radio button. Example: the input type range element attribute. Type attribute returns what type of form element the slider control is. Value attribute specifies or returns the value of the value attribute of the slider control. Example: attribute element input type reset. Type attribute returns the type of the reset button form element. Value attribute specifies or returns the value of the reset button's value attribute. Example: attributes element input type search. Type attribute returns the type of the form element. The search field. Placeholder attribute sets or returns the value of the search field placeholder attribute. Example: attributes element input type submit. The type attribute returns the type of the form, which is the submit button. Value attribute specifies or returns the value of the value attribute of the submit button. Example: attribute the input type text element. Type attribute returns the type of the form element text field. Value attribute specifies or returns the value of the value attribute of the text field. Example: attribute the element input type time. The type attribute returns a form type. A time field. Value attribute specifies or returns the value of the value attribute of the time field. Example: attributes element input type URL. Type attribute returns the type of the form element. The URL field. Value attribute specifies or returns the value of the value attribute of the URL field. Example: the button element defines a button. You can place content, such as text or images, inside an element's button. This is the difference between this element and buttons created by inputting an element. Example: tip. All specify the type attribute for the button element. Different browsers use different default types for an element's button. Buttons are often styled with CSS. Attributes of the button element. The name attribute specifies the name of the button. Attribute type button specifies the type of button. Attribute type reset specifies the type of reset. The type submit attribute indicates the type of submission. Example: the select element defines a drop-down list. The select element is used to create a drop-down list. The option elements inside the select element define the available options in the list. Example: attributes of the select element. Attribute multiple indicates that multiple parameters can be selected at the same time. Attribute name defines a name for the drop-down list. The required attribute specifies that the user must select a value before submitting the form. Example: The datalist element specifies a list of predefined parameters for input controls. The datalist element contains a set of option elements that represent the valid or recommended values available for selecting the input element. These values are displayed in input as a drop-down list and are filtered as data is entered into the field. When the page is rendered, the datalist element does not display anything. It is hidden along with its child elements. The datalist element is connected to the input element using the list attribute. While the id value of the datalist element must match the value of the list attribute of the input element. Example: the opt group element defines a group of related options in a drop-down list. An opt group element is a group of option elements with a common label, usually in bold. Browsers display such groups as related to each other, separately from other option elements. Example: attributes of the opt group element. The label text attribute specifies the label for the group parameter. Example: the option element specifies an option in the drop-down list. The option element is an option in the select element or part of the list in the datalist element. In some cases, the option element can act as a placeholder in the select element. Example: attributes of the option element. The value text attribute specifies the value that is sent to the server. Example: the text area element defines a multi-line text area input control. The text area element defines a multi-line text input control. The text area can contain an unlimited number of characters, and the text is displayed in a fixed width font, usually Courier. The size of the text area can be specified by the cols and rows attributes, or even better, via the CSS height and width properties. Example: attributes of the text area element. Attribute name text specifies a name for the text area. Attribute rows number specifies the number of rows in the text area. Cols number attribute defines the visible width of the text area. Attribute placeholder text specifies a short hint that describes the expected value of the text area. The required attribute indicates that the text area must be filled. Example: element output defines the result of the calculation. The output element represents a container element that a site or program can display the results of calculations or the result of a user's action. Example: attributes of the output element. The for-element id attribute defines the relationship between the result of the calculation and the elements used in the calculation. Example: attribute form id specifies one or more forms to which the source element belongs. Example: attribute name defines the name of the source element. Example: element progress shows the progress of the task. The progress element displays a widget that displays a task completion indicator. With its help, users can monitor the progress of a long operation. The completion indicator can show either an approximate percentage of completion or indicate that the operation is in progress. Example: attributes of the progress element. The max number attribute determines the amount of work required to complete the task. Attribute value number indicates how many tasks have been completed. Example: the field set element groups related elements in a form. The field set element groups form controls and labels to them, not necessarily with a title. Field set draws a rectangle around the associated elements. Example: element legend defines the title for the field set element. The legend element is the header for the rest of the content of the parent field set element. Example: thank you for being with us on this exciting journey. I hope you have gained valuable knowledge and inspiration to start your web development career. Don't stop there. The world of web development is endless. And even more interesting and difficult tasks await you ahead. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next development tutorials and other interesting topics. Like if you enjoyed this tutorial and share your success in the comments.